Chapter 1: The Ominous Storm. The small town of Ravenwood sat nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests and craggy hills. Its residents often joked that it seemed like the kind of place where time had forgotten to move forward. Cobblestone streets, weathered storefronts, and a creaky wooden church bell added to its old-world charm. But there was something else about Ravenwood, something that made outsiders uneasy and locals wary of speaking too much. Strange things happened in Ravenwood. Animals would go missing, crops would fail overnight, and the weather would often turn without warning. It was as though the town had a mind of its own, one that could be as unpredictable as it was cruel. On the night of October 13th, the skies darkened earlier than usual. Thick, roiling clouds gathered above, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive stillness. People hurried indoors, locking their doors and drawing their curtains. It wasn't uncommon for sudden storms to roll through Ravenwood, but this one felt different. Emma Carlisle, a journalist in her late 20s, arrived in Ravenwood just as the first drops of rain began to fall. She was on assignment for a piece about eerie small-town legends, and Ravenwood was at the top of her list. As she parked her car outside the only inn in town, she noticed how quiet everything was. No children playing, no couples strolling, not even a dog barking. Just the sound of the wind and the faint rustle of leaves. "Charming," she muttered, grabbing her bag and stepping out into the drizzle. The innkeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, greeted her with a cautious smile. "You've chosen an interesting night to visit, Miss Carlisle," she said, her tone dripping with foreboding. "The storms here can be peculiar." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Peculiar how?" The older woman hesitated, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting something to appear. "You'll see soon enough," she said finally, handing Emma her room key. "Just stay indoors tonight. Whatever you do, don't go out once the rain starts." Chapter 2: Blood red drops. By the time Emma settled into her room, the storm was in full swing. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and flashes of lightning illuminated the town below. She sat by the window, jotting notes in her journal, when something unusual caught her eye. The rain. It wasn't clear. Emma leaned closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The droplets sliding down the pane were dark and thick. Frowning, she opened the window just a crack and caught a drop on her fingertip. Her stomach turned as she realized the liquid wasn't water, it was red. Dark red, like blood. A knock at her door startled her, and she quickly wiped her hand on her jeans. Opening the door, she found Mrs. Abernathy standing there, her face pale. "It's starting," the innkeeper said in a hushed voice. "Close your window and stay put. Don't let it touch you." Before Emma could ask what she meant, the woman was gone, retreating down the hallway with hurried steps. Emma closed the window and locked it, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe it was just some odd weather phenomenon, but the look on Mrs. Abernathy's face suggested otherwise. The storm grew fiercer as the night wore on. The rain pounded against the roof like a relentless drumbeat, and the wind howled through the trees. Emma's curiosity got the better of her. Armed with her camera and a raincoat, she decided to step outside and document the strange weather. After all, this could be her big story. As she stepped into the street, the rain soaked through her coat almost instantly. It felt warm and sticky against her skin. The metallic smell was unmistakable. Emma's stomach churned, but she pressed on, snapping pictures of the crimson puddles forming in the cobblestone cracks. She wasn't alone. Chapter 3: The Watchers. Through the curtain of rain, Emma saw shapes moving. At first, she thought they were other townsfolk, braving the storm for some inexplicable reason. But as they drew closer, she realized they weren't human. Figures, shadowy and distorted, seemed to rise from the puddles themselves. They moved unnaturally, gliding rather than walking, their forms shifting like smoke. Emma froze, her camera hanging limply at her side. One of the figures turned toward her, and though it had no discernible face, she felt its gaze pierce her very soul. A sudden, sharp pain shot through her head, and she stumbled backward. The world tilted, and the sound of the storm became a deafening roar. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground, her camera smashed beside her. The figures were gone. Terrified, Emma scrambled to her feet and ran back to the inn, her heart pounding. She locked the door behind her and collapsed onto the bed, shaking. She had no explanation for what she'd seen, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary storm. Chapter 4. The town's secret. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape stained red. The townsfolk were out, scrubbing the streets and muttering prayers under their breath. Emma ventured downstairs, her mind racing with questions. Mrs. Abernathy was in the dining room, sipping tea. She looked up as Emma entered, her expression grim. "You went out, didn't you?" Emma nodded. "What was that? The rain? Those things? What's happening here?" The innkeeper sighed, setting her cup down. "It's an old curse," she said. "The Blackwood family, the original settlers of Ravenwood, made a deal they shouldn't have. They wanted prosperity, power, and protection. But the price was steep. Every generation, the town must endure a night like this. A night when the spirits of the damned rise to collect their due." Emma's blood ran cold. "Why didn't anyone warn me? Would you have believed us?" Mrs. Abernathy countered. "Outsiders never do. And those who see the storm for what it truly is, well, they don't usually last long."